The following is a presentation from PokerStars.com. Last time on the big game, the fireworks came fast and furious.
Here we go, boys.
Pot.
And lasted all night long.
Raise a pot. Ball.
Tony G set his sights on Phil Hellmuth.
You're the best player in the world.
Punish him, Tony G.
But it was Jason Mercier who dealt Tony some pain. His straight toppled Tony's set on an innocent-looking flop, and a fortune was shipped over to the young pro. Clearly, this loose cannon has his work cut out for himself at this wild table. Tonight on the big game.
This is the PokerStars.com Big Game.
Welcome once again to the big game from Las Vegas, Nevada. Alongside Joe Stapleton, I'm Chris Rose. And tonight, some of the best players in the world have come to battle it out with nearly $1 million on the table in our state-of-the-art poker room.
The man in black, Phil Hellmuth, starts today's session up over $70,000.
Ivy Leaguer Ike Haxton is here as well. The Brown grad is actually in the red. He's stuck almost $32K.
Tony G had a tougher day. He bought in for $500,000, the highest amount in big game history. He stuck over $127,000.
The magician Antonio Esfandiari has seen nearly half his stack disappear. He's down almost 45 grand.
And in seat one is this week's loose cannon, 39-year-old Russ Harlow from Manchester, Connecticut. He's married with 3 kids and works the graveyard shift delivering baked goods. He's currently up $5,000.
And the empty seat at the table belongs to last night's big winner, Jason Mercier. He's up nearly 130 grand. Right now, Jason is standing by with Amanda Leatherman.
Jason, you're off to an awesome start. How much do you enjoy these types of cash games?
Oh, I mean, I love this format. With the loose cannon, it's much different than any tournament you play, or even playing online. This is much more exciting. You get to play against some of the best players in the world and have a chance to win a lot of money.
And it's easy when you flop the nuts.
Yeah, if you flop the nuts against a set, then get all the money in and hope for the best.
Right. What do you think about the loose cannon so far?
Well, he's been playing, relatively tight, but he played a couple big pots, and he doesn't seem like he's afraid to mix it up.
All right, we'll get out there.
Thanks.
Once again, each loose cannon is staked 100 grand to play and keeps all winnings above the initial 100,000. And the loose cannon who wins the most money at season's end earns a North American Poker Tour passport worth $50,000.
For now, that passport belongs to Nadia Magnus. She is our leading loose cannon. The single mom took home almost $64,000.
Russ Harlow has turned a profit so far. At the opposite end of the spectrum is Tony G, who folds his first hand.
Indiami.
Queen Jack suited for Ike Haxton, who raises to $1,500. Ace Jack for Jason Mercier.
Jason's got Ike dominated.
He calls. Phil folds. Pocket pair for the cannon.
Russ's pair of sixes is the best hand for now.
He calls. Jack 5 suited for Antonio.
Antonio's got decent odds to defend his big blind.
And does so.
Nothing wrong with Antonio's call, but he's dominated as well.
The flop, King 7-5, 2 clubs. Harlow checks, the best hand. Esfandiari checks.
Russ might have the best hand, but Antonio caught the only piece of the board. Ike was the original aggressor.
And leads out, betting 4,000. Mercier folds.
Not too scary of a board for Russ. He might not hate his hand.
Actually, he does. He folds, and so does Antonio. So Haxton picks up the first pot of the night.
Russ made a profit last night, but it might be a little too early to try to protect it.
Well, here are the rules of the big game. Each table lasts exactly 150 hands. The action pre-flop is pot limit, then no limit after the flop. Blinds are 2 and 400 with a $100 ante, all of which is paid by the player on the button. And every player begins with at least $100K, but can reload for up to $500,000.
The loose cannon, no stranger to actual cannons. Russ served in the military as a chaplain assistant in a combat support hospital.
I'm talking to the USO right now, so we'll see.
We were going to fly to Iraq.
Yeah?
It was all set up.
You and I, yeah. I mean,
By John
canceled.
Caldwell, the guy that's running now.
Really?
This show. Yeah, we were going to, well, it was a while ago.
Yeah.
Like
it was
3,
about
4 years ago?
maybe 07 or something, 06 maybe.
06?
I told you I was ready to go.
We were going to go and play
going to right
poker in
time
Iraq.
right?
It was all arranged, yeah.
I guess poker in the Army is a pretty natural fit.
Poker and the Army go together like Hellmuth and name dropping.
Oh, are you kidding?
All right.
The soldiers play poker every day. I mean, it's
Tony raises from the big blind, and the magician folds.
Tony takes it down uncontested.
So if I go, I would go to Spain, and then
Iraq.
24 hours, and then either Iraq or Afghanistan. They call it a down line, down range, or something like that.
Phil Hellmuth entertains us. Why not entertain the troops?
Very nice gesture on his part. Action folds over to the loose cannon. He's out. Antonio, ace-queen.
I've never been in the military. I feel like I owe something, you know?
Like me and you would go to the military, we get training for 6 months just to do the big trip to Afghanistan to play.
Now that's a reality show I would watch. Tony G and Phil Hellmuth in basic training.
To play the poker game.
Antonio's raise wins it.
I'd re-enlist just to be there.
We'd have to get fit, pass a few tests to pre-qualify. Then we get a mission as well there. Part of the covert operation.
We'd go there, we'd try to entertain the troops, you know? We'd MC a poker tournament, play poker with the troops, you know?
It would be fun, though. We have to try to do it again.
I would go see a Spies Like Us remake with Phil and Tony G. Tony G could give the U.S. insurance on the mission success, and Phil could just name drop all the enemy soldiers he captures.
Russ Harlow, ace-jack, raises to 1,700. Antonio folds. Tony G, 4 high.
Tony's got a pretty weak hand, but he does have position on Russ.
He calls from the button. Haxton folds. 9-6 for Mercier in the big blind.
Jason's already got some money in there.
Calls.
How'd this work out last time for me?
Don't remind me. For you, it worked out really good.
Last time these three were involved in a hand, Jason beat Tony out of 130 grand.
Deuce 5 queen on the flop. Mercier checks.
Russ has been outflopped by the worst hand again.
But he leads out, betting 4,200.
Tony G is almost never folding a pair on this flop to a loose cannon.
He calls, and Mercier folds. So from 3 on the flop to 2 on the turn. 4 of hearts. Tony with bottom 2 pair.
This is a terrible card for Russ. Not only does it look like a safe card, but it's going to make it impossible for him to get Tony to fold.
Harlow fires 11,000.
If it weren't for Tony making a second pair here on the turn, this would be a really good double barrel from the cannon, but instead, Russ is in serious trouble.
Tony raises to 30,000.
Since Russ fired twice, Tony probably thinks Russ has more of a decision to make.
Harlow folds, and Tony G wins the hand after calling with 4 high. As for the loose cannon, he is heading the wrong direction. He is now in the red. The big game is just getting going. Much more from Las Vegas coming your way after this. Welcome back to the big game in Las Vegas. Alongside Joe Stapleton, I'm Chris Rose. Action continues with Antonio, who folds. Tony G, out of here. Ike, ace-5, folds. Jason Mercier on the button. Raises to 1,500. Hellmuth folds. The cannon, Jack-6. Folds.
Jason takes it down, adding a small pot to his big stack.
Well, in his brief career, Jason Mercier's been described as a quiet kid whose play screams, "Look at me!"
Well, Jason's pretty aggressive and he's got a lot of talent, so he's definitely one of the top poker players in the world.
I think he's a little bit more of a natural-born Hold'em player.
and I can't say that about more than 5 or 10 people in the world.
I mean, he's got cojones, you know, and people don't like to play against guys that are crazy and willing to do anything. And Jason's pretty crazy, so a lot of times people just don't want to get involved because they know that he's capable of doing a lot of things.
I've definitely been getting a lot more attention recently because of my success. You know, I've been on television a lot more in the U.S. and just get recognized a lot more at the poker tours. And, you know, it's kind of strange at first, but, you know, you get used to it. And as long as you don't let it go to your head, you know, you should be all right. You know, I've always wanted to be successful, and I've always wanted to be the best at whatever I'm doing. When it comes to poker, you know, I just really want to be the best player. That's my goal now, and I'm just trying to make money and, you know, keep winning.
Jason Mercier is definitely one to watch out for. And now it's time for the debut of the Couch Cannon hand. This is where you at home will feel what it's like to sit in the loose cannon seat. So, Joe, we don't know anybody's hand except for the cannons, and we're going to play along. You ready?
I am ready.
All right, action's folded on over to the loose cannon. King Jack.
King Jack, action's been folded. Pretty easy raise.
Yep, to 1,600. Antonio in the small blind. He re-raises to 4,900. Big blind folds. Action back on over to Harlow.
Antonio could be re-stealing from the small blind, but calling 3 bets with King Jacks is a risky proposition. Even in position, you're going to miss the flop most of the time, and then you're just stuck with King High.
Well, Russ calls.
King Jack is a hand that has awful reverse implied odds, meaning you stand to lose a lot of money when you make a second best hand.
Well, now Russ has got top pair after the Jack Trey 8 flop.
Russ might like his hand for now. We'll have to see what Antonio does.
He bets 8,100.
See, this pot is bloated from the 3-bet pre-flop, and now Russ is facing a big bet here with just one pair. The worst part is that if you call here and Antonio bets again, the bets are going to get exponentially bigger.
Obviously, it's not easy sitting in that seat. Russ calls.
Even though it might be an easy call now, the bets are just going to get bigger and bigger.
6 of diamonds on the turn, putting 3 diamonds on the board.
At this point, Russ is probably hoping he doesn't have to face a huge bet here. He can't like the diamond.
Antonio checks.
Antonio slowed down for a second. Since Russ doesn't have a diamond, he should make Antonio pay if he's going to draw to one.
Russ bets 19,000.
Well, my guess is that Antonio doesn't have diamonds or the money would be in already. My guess is also that they'd be in the muck by now if he hated his hand.
All in.
Antonio's all in.
Well, I've narrowed Antonio's hand down to any 2 cards. I wonder how Russ is doing with it. How are all you couch cannons doing? Russ is really being put to the test here. He could very well have the best hand, but there's a lot at stake for Russ. That's almost his whole stack, and Antonio did 3-bet in pre-flop.
Wow, wow, wow. How much more is it, 20?
20,100.
Personally, I think Russ pot committed himself when he made the original bet here on the turn. If he was going to fold to a check raise, he should have just checked behind. Then again, it's not my new minivan on the line.
What a bad bet by me.
Russ folds, and Antonio had the same hand with a king high flush draw.
Nice hand.
Get away with one.
Needed that one.
Needed a boost, a lift.
You needed a call? You needed a call? Or you just needed the pot?
Well, I actually thought about it for a while. Then
you needed the call.
Then I wanted a call. But if he said call, I was dead.
Yeah, of course.
Dead. I only had a pair.
You had a big pair? Did you had a pair?
Either I had him or I didn't, so.
I'm glad it happened the way it did.
If we take a look at the number of pots won, Antonio has won the most, but don't let it deceive you. He's still stocked 15,000. Meanwhile, our big winner tonight, Jason Mercier, has only won 11% of the hands, but they've been the right 11%. Total pots won is a stat that looks pretty, but doesn't always translate to big winnings.
Well, this looks pretty for Jason Mercier and Phil Hellmuth. Not so for Antonio, Ike, Russell, and Tony G. In fact, our loose cannon has got to start kicking it into high gear if he has any hopes of turning a profit after 150 hands. Phil looking at Queen Deuce and folds. Loose cannon's out. Ace Jack for Antonio, who raises. King Deuce for Tony G. Calls. Ike folds.
I'll take one.
Mercier's out. So 2 to the flop.
Oh, I'm glad the whole cams are back. I felt like Alex Trebek when he's not on the set of Jeopardy.
The answer is 5 deuce 9. The question is, what is the flop?
We'll see if Antonio continues here.
He does, betting 3,200. Tony G with bottom pair calls.
Pretty rare to see Tony fold any pair on the flop.
The turn, the 3 of clubs.
And he's right not to. He's still got the best hand. Antonio's picked up a gut shot.
And checks.
That 3 isn't exactly a scary card for Tony, even though it is an overcard, technically.
Tony bets 7,000.
Looks like Antonio might think Tony's got air. And he's not that far off.
Esfandiari calls. Board pairs on the river. Antonio checks.
Tony's trying to decide if he'd ever get called by a worse hand if he bets his pair of deuces.
Tony checks and wins.
I should have bet him.
I was calling you too. You should have bet.
I know. I'm not in the zone. I know you're calling. It's so sick.
Well, Tony G might have lost out on some coin, but he's still got a little cash back. See if he can get into the zone when we come back.
The pot limit pre-flop and no limit post-flop can affect my play significantly because that will allow me to play many more hands. I will go out, sort of out of line, and play more pots pre-flop than what mathematically correct would be. But when it's pot limit, then you can basically see every hand, and you have a chance if it's the right table and right circumstances. You're running good. You could own that table because you could be in every pot. There's no way they can push you out pre-flop. So that's the main change. That it's a flop game and it's a post-flop game more than just pre-flop.
Well, let's see if Tony G lives what he speaks.
We can see by looking at his VPIP or how often he's voluntarily entering the pot pre-flop that at this point he's leading the table, getting in there just under 50% of the time. People love playing with Tony because he gives a lot of action, and they're getting it tonight.
Action on the loose cannon. Russ Harlow, ace-9 suited. He has stuck nearly half the 100 grand he was staked. Raises to 1,700. King Jack for Antonio. Calls. King 4 suited for Tony G. Calls. Ike folds. So does Mercier. Pocket pair for Phil.
Here he comes. You've been quiet, Phil. Preserving your lead.
Not really. I check.
Phil checks in the dark. 4 King 10, 2 pair for Tony.
Once again, the worst hand flops the best.
Phil is checked down over to Russ.
Russ has got nothing but ace high at this point.
The cannon checks.
Antonio has top pair, but he's in serious trouble with Tony G.
Esfandiari fires 4,200.
Tony started off dominated and ended up flopping Antonio so dirty with top and bottom pair.
Raises to 15,000. Hellmuth folds. So does Harlow.
Antonio can't like this raise, but Tony G is capable of making this play on a pure bluff. Antonio's got nearly the same hand he had in our couch cannon hand. Tony might be a loose cannon, but he's no amateur.
Antonio calls. The turn, the queen of hearts giving Antonio an open-ender. He checks.
Tony can't like the fact that there's more pain out there. If Antonio didn't just catch up, he's very likely to have picked up a bunch more outs, which he did.
What do you have left?
You want exact count?
No, it's fine.
56,200 if you're scoring at home. Tony checks. The river, the king of clubs giving Antonio trips, but Tony fills up.
Worst card ever for Antonio. Best card ever for Tony. Antonio will have no idea he's crushed here.
Action on Esfandiari, who bets 20,000.
Tony G has to raise here. It's just a matter of how much he thinks Antonio will call.
Tony raises to 125 grand.
This is a polarizing raise. There are only a few hands that could have Antonio beat, and it's going to be tough for him to put Tony on that narrow of a hand. So Antonio is wondering, does Tony G the maniac have one of those few hands that has me beat, or is this just Tony G being a maniac?
What the hell did you check the turn with, Tony?
Tony G's got a boat, and he wants Antonio to board it and set sail for Value Island. Antonio is having a very difficult time making this laydown.
All right, call.
Antonio calls all in and sees the bad news.
I see.
Tony wins a pot of 150 grand.
Chips, the worst.
Antonio Esfandiari reloads and grabs a snack that Mom packed too. A cash sandwich. We're back with more after this. Welcome back. Quick look at the cash count of the big game. Only 2 players are in Profitville. And our loose cannon, Russ Harlow, he was staked 100 grand. He is down nearly half that. Antonio lost his stake, dug into his backpack, picked out another 50 grand, and he is first to act and folds. Ace-5 for Tony. Raises to 1,300. 6-5 of diamonds for Ike.
Suited connectors are the kinds of hands you want more players in the pot.
He calls. Well, there's another suited connectors.
And one more player in the pot.
Phil folds. King 4 for the cannon. He's out. So it'll be 3 to the flop.
Tony has the best hand, but Jason's got the best odds of ending up the winner.
Jack, Queen, Jack.
Tony's hand is still the best through the flop, but Jason's got a lot of outs.
Tony fires 3,000. Haxton folds.
Jason has an open ender. He could semi-bluff raise here, but if Tony decided to re-raise him, he'd be stuck with 10 high.
Mercier calls. The turn. 7 of hearts giving Jason a straight flush draw. Tony checks.
Jason's picked up even more outs. Any heart will make him a flush.
He checks. The river, Queen of clubs. Tony checks.
Tony's played this pretty passively. Jason looks like he's going to bluff at it, and he does.
Firing 7,300.
Tony's only got ace high, but it is the best hand. Let's see if he falls for Jason's bluff.
Call.
You got it.
What have you got? Can you open the hand? Sorry.
Why do you want to see my hand?
I just want to see what you call the flop with, that's all. I'm sorry. It's nothing personal, right?
Asking for a hand to be opened is a big no-no in live poker.
That's fair enough, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it's really reasonable.
I think it's real. I don't want to be nasty or anything. I'm just
I'm don't think it's being an ass. It's just bad etiquette.
Sorry?
It's just bad etiquette.
To see the hand?
The losing hand.
It was bad etiquette to call me on the flop. Right?
It's bad etiquette to not bet the turn. Yeah.
Just want to see what's in your mind, in your head.
See it on TV.
But I just want to see hands in principle. It's nothing.
It was
personal.
bad etiquette to ask to see the losing hand.
It was? Okay. You wouldn't ask?
You know that.
I hardly ask, but that was an interesting situation.
You never ask. Yeah, I've never
because
seen
a lot
you
of
You won
players.
the hand, you shouldn't ask to see the losing.
A lot of players would raise on the. I mean, it would have been.
It won't
I just
be an
wanted to
issue
see.
against me. If I bluff and you call, I'm proudly tabling it.
I usually wouldn't see it, but I just get specific about when there's pairs on the board. How.
See, I'm not trying to pick on you, but I think for the people at home that are watching this, they should know that you shouldn't ask to see the losing hand, you know? It's bad etiquette, but you know that.
I don't. Well, I don't. I'm sorry. I think if you pay, I'm the one paying. I'm the one paying $7,300.
Tony, you know it. Come on, man.
I know it's fine. I know
know.
it's fine to see that. In that situation, I know it's fine to see the hand. Whatever I feel is correct, that's how I have to go by.
Whatever you feel is correct.
Okay, but then don't ask if it's bad etiquette, because then you're asking for everyone else's opinion. In your world, it's not. So
Right.
No, it's
not a big
in my
deal.
world. It's in that situation.
It's like if you're
right now,
golfing,
right
Tony.
here.
If you're golfing for money with somebody and you shout in the middle of their backswing, it's not illegal, but it's bad etiquette.
Please, that's very different.
Yeah, I think. I don't know if I buy that analogy.
4.
That's the way it used to be.
That's like cheating. I mean,
That's the way it used to be in the past. To ever ask to see anybody's hand was horrible etiquette. It's changed,
I
so
never
it's not
asked
that
hardly,
big a deal.
but this was an interesting situation.
What Tony did was within the rules, but frowned upon.
Well, it's blind versus blind to the flop.
Yeah, I've never seen you ask before. Maybe one time.
I don't know, but this was.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to see.
Middle pair for the cannon.
It's not your style to ask to see a hand, Tony.
That's 800.
Antonio's got squat.
You've got to mix it
Folds.
up. It can't be predictable, right? I mean, if you're always going to know that you never have to, I'm never going to ask.
You get to play with the loose. You get to play with the loose Russians. You get to play with the loose Russians.
If this game were in Moscow, do you ask to see the hand?
Never. I would never see the hand. So there's certain situations against a superior player. I think it's fine. You know, when you're the one, when you're the Russian.
Jason raises.
The tables are turned. It's fine to see it. Now, for Jason to ask me would be bad etiquette. But for me, taking into account that I've donated $150,000 to the fund, I think it's reasonable.
Yeah, you got all your money in with second set against them.
Tony calls.
I wouldn't call that a donation.
I do. I mean, I could have just called and folded. I think I played it bad.
5 king deuce, middle pair for Tony.
Which is the best hand.
He checks. Mercier fires 2,600. And Tony calls. The turn, 8 of diamonds.
Ding, ding, ding. Jason binks the turn, and it'll be tough for Tony to put him on an 8.
Tony checks over to Jason, who bets 5,700.
Tony may not suspect the 8, but with Jason now firing twice, he might be a little concerned about him having a king.
Tony calls.
Tony G doesn't fold pairs.
The river, the 9 of spades.
Tony's now got 4th pair, but he does have some showdown value.
I check.
Tony checks.
Jason's hand isn't much better, but he hasn't checked behind yet.
And he remains aggressive, firing 11-7.
This is pretty impressive. Jason Mercier is value betting 3rd pair.
Tony folds as Jason gets a little revenge on his poker buddy.
You see the hand?
No, thanks. I got one.
I lost. That would be bad etiquette to grab the hands, but that happens. That happens in my game all the time.
Jason keeps stacking chips. He's up over 125 grand. It would be bad etiquette not to come back, so stay tuned. There's more of the big game, the Charm School Edition, when we come back. Welcome back. For all the stats of every hand and action that's too hot for TV, don't forget to check out the website. The time right now to check in on our loose cannon Russ Harlow. He's going to need all hands on deck to help turn a profit. The father of 3 from Connecticut, though, still has plenty of time to heat up.
If Russ is going to try to turn it around, this stat has got to bother him. So far at Showdown, the guy who delivers baked goods is winning a big fat bagel. On the flip side, call Phil Hellmuth Jr. the yellow pages because every time you look him up, he's got it.
Well, Phil will now let his fingers do the walking. He is the first to act on this hand.
Phil's been in that 6th seat every time he's played on the big game, and it hasn't been too lucky for him so far. And he's told us he thinks the seat is cursed.
He folds here. Pocket pair for the cannon. Raises to 1,500. Antonio folds. Tony G on the button. Suited connectors. Wow, folds.
Not a mandatory call.
Ike folds as well. Now big slick for Jason Mercier.
Now this would be a surprising fold.
He calls.
Could have raised there, but he is out of position.
The flop, Queen 10 deuce, 2 spades, a gut shot for Mercier who checks.
Jason checks to the razor. Russ has the best hand. Kind of a scary flop for 2 5s.
But he's going to fire away, 2,200.
Jason's got 2 overs and a gut shot. Also, there's a small chance ace-king is good.
Mercier calls.
Sometimes you just got to take one off.
The turn, the 9 of diamonds. No help to Mercier, who checks. Harlow checks as well. The river's the 9 of hearts. Mercier checks.
5s.
Good.
Neither player loved his hand. Kind of like a real relationship. All new and exciting at first, but by the end, you'd muck them for $1.
Well, Russ picks up $8,200, gets a little cash back. He's building that house brick by brick. In the meantime, that might be the worst wink I've ever seen.
Maybe he's got some Costanza grapefruit pulp in his eye.
Great. Anybody wearing oven mitts, too? If they're hand model? Action folds over to Tony G.
Now Tony's going to play some suited connectors.
Raises to 2,000. Haxton suited as well, but not connected.
You can see Ike's wheels are cranking.
Repops to 7,200.
I fold.
Mercier folds, fills out.
It's a pretty healthy 3-bet. Ike knows it's going to take a big bet to ever get Tony to fold pre-flop.
Which, of course, Tony doesn't.
Not big enough in this case.
The flop. 4 tray 7, 2 clubs. Tony with a flush draw and checks.
Ike's made middle pair. Let's see if he continues his pre-flop aggression.
He doesn't and checks. Jack of diamonds on the turn. Gives Tony a straight draw as well, and he bets 10,000.
This is a pretty big bet, but Tony's semi-bluffing his draws, and the pot is already bloated from the pre-flop action.
Call.
Ike calls.
Ike has to wonder if that jack really hit Tony. Would he lead out with it?
The river. The 10 of spades gives Tony second pair. He checks.
Not a good value betting hand.
Check.
10.
And Tony G picks up the pot worth more than 35 grand. That win puts him in the black for the first time this week in the big game. See if he can hang on to the cash after this. Welcome back to the big game, and if you're just joining us, a few hands ago, Tony G broke poker protocol by asking to see Mercier's mucked hand.
Jason, were you really upset with me asking to see that hand?
No, I'm not. I wasn't like upset. I just don't think you should do it.
Fair enough. I never asked, you know. First time I think I've ever asked.
Plus, I was embarrassed that I had all this.
So I was surprised, in fact, to see that hand. So
Yeah, I had a brain
I
fart.
thought it was a good request in that sense.
Why were you surprised?
I thought he might have had a different kind of hand. That hand also had actually winning equity in a check. Unfortunately, that had a lot of winning equity. It wasn't, so it was like a medium sort of bet. So it actually gave me a bit of information.
It's like getting information by checking your girlfriend's email because it was open. Not cool.
What's wrong with that?
Don't even.
Tony G, pocket pair, raised to 2,000. Haxton folds. King, queen for Jason Mercier.
Not many players are going to fold this on the button.
Wow, what a show.
Re-raises to 6,800. Hellmuth folds.
Re-raising with king queen isn't always a great idea, but Jason's far ahead of Tony's range.
Queen 4 suited for the loose cannon.
I think Russ was trying to will himself 2 aces there. Didn't work.
Tony G calls, so 2 to the flop.
Jason and Tony at it again.
9, king 9. Tony checks. Jason hits his king and checks. 10 of spades on the turn. Tony checks.
The board just got worse for both players.
Mercier checks. Ace of hearts on the river. Tony checks.
It's been checked all the way down. Jason may feel like it's safe to bet his king.
Which he does, firing 5,200.
Especially with the pre-flop action. Tough for Tony to have the best hand on that board, and he lets it go.
So Mercier picks up a decent-sized pot, and his stack just continues to grow.
Jason will occasionally build something cool out of those chips. Maybe we'll get another castle this time around. Right now he's got 233,000 of them to work with.
Oh, did you see that little look between Jason and Phil? Brothers in arms.
A little warm fuzzy for their united front against Tony G.
No battle this hand for Tony. Ike, queen 10 suited. Raises to 1,500. Queen Jack for Jason Mercier.
Jason's got position on Ike, and we know he's got Ike dominated.
Repops to 5,200. King Jack for Phil.
Wow, I'm getting run over here.
Domination nation, as Phil's now got Jason dominated, but he lets it go.
Ace deuce for the loose cannon and the small blinds out, and Antonio folds ace deuce as well. So now back to Ike.
Tough to lay a hand like this down to a guy like Jason.
I'll call.
He will not lay it down.
This is how good Jason Mercier is. He just got 3 better hands to fold and the 1 worse hand to call him.
9, 8, 6. Both have gut shot straight draws. Ike checks.
Jason's still out in front with a bigger queen.
Jason checks. 3 of spades on the turn.
That card's pretty innocuous.
Haxton checks.
A big bet could take it down if Jason wants to continue his aggression.
He doesn't. Checks. The river, the deuce of clubs.
Both players have queen high. We'll have to see if anybody wants this pot.
Haxton does. He fires 7,800.
What say you, Jason Mercier? Do you want this pot?
No, thank you.
Ike takes it down by waving the bigger stick.
So Ike scoops up the pot, but Joe, he is still down nearly 40,000 on the week.
Well, despite being down, Ike's still playing very aggressively. His aggression factor is tied for number 1 at the table. He's winning 17% of all the hands, but he hasn't won 1 red cent at Showdown. That could explain why he's trying to win these pots with aggression rather than showing his cards.
Haxton UTG, as the kids like to say, Joe.
Nailed it.
He folds. Suited 1 gapper for Jason Mercier. Raises to 1,500. King 5 suited for Phil.
Hellmuth's been quiet for a while. Looks like he's tired of riding the bench.
He calls. Russ Harlow, the loose cannon. Ace 9 on the button. Facing a raise and a call. And he calls.
Ace-9 is a dangerous hand, but he does have the best hand right now.
Tony G's going to make it a 4-person party.
Russ is in the lead heading to the flop, but Tony's got one of his outs.
King, Jack, Ace, 2 spades. Tony G checks top pair. Jason Mercier checks his flush draw. Phil with second pair.
Looks like he might think it's the best hand.
Bets 2,500. Harlow, top pair. And he folds.
If you're going to call a raise with an ace and you hit one, you should at least stick around for one bet.
Well, that's what Tony G is doing.
Tony just called with a worse hand than Russ folded.
And Mercier calls. The turn, 8 of clubs. Tony G's hand still best. Bets 8,500.
Tony wants to make sure anyone pays to draw. Right now, Jason's got a pair and a flush draw, so we probably can't fold for a bet that's less than half the pot.
He will not fold. He calls.
Phil's got to have a pretty good idea what shape his hand is in now, hence the laborious uncapping of his cards.
He folds. Another 8 on the river, giving Mercier trip 8s. Tony G checks.
It's a terrible card for Tony. Not only did it beat him, but it doesn't look scary because it didn't make any real draws. Jason's hand is super disguised.
He bets 28,000.
So Tony might pay off a bigger bet here than normal. For a lot of players, this would be a pretty loose call. Then again, Tony is a pretty loose player.
Tony calls. And Jason will gladly show his hand to Tony G this time.
My guess, Tony G didn't buy in for $500,000 to fold a lot.
So Jason Mercier wins a pot of 87 grand on the last hand of the night, and he is up nearly 175,000.
Phil Hellmuth looks like he might be shaking his big game curse. He's up 67,000. Meanwhile, the rest of the table sits in the loss column with Antonio Esfandiari down over 100 grand.
All right, guys, that's it for tonight. Russ, it's getting a little dicey out there.
Yeah,
Still feel like you have enough time?
I think I'll be okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Anybody have any advice for the loose cannon?
Just start shipping it all in.
Yeah?
Get that money in.
Yeah.
It's too early for him to ship it.
No.
But soon.
It's never too early. All right, guys, that's it for tonight. I'm Amanda Leatherman saying goodbye for now. And remember, if you've got the cash and the guts, there's always a seat open at the big game. See you next time.
For Joe Stapleton, I'm Chris Rose. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Sick river that one was.
Never won on top.
You're not superstitious, are you?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
If you bet more, I might have put that.
You might have folded.
I might have raised.
Oh, you might have raised.
I had to raise all in.
All your orange chips. I was like,
You would have got them all. It would have been hard to call though.
I know.
The preceding was a presentation from PokerStars.com.